Welcome to VoiceBox After Hours.
Welcome back to another episode of After Hours on VoiceBox. We have the lovely Fern with us today, who is not only a broadcaster, she does an awful lot of audio description voiceover, and I would say, Fern, having known you for a little while, quite a key player in highlighting issues within accessibility as well. And I think that's a really important thing to say. In terms of audio description, I am on the wrong side of 35. I have long black hair. And I'm female, and I'm with Fern, who is wearing a beautiful floral dress with mid-brown hair and is wearing headphones. And that's that. So you'll be able to pick this up on YouTube as well as Spotify. And obviously, if you're watching it on LinkedIn, a big welcome to you. And we will tag Fern in the post, so feel free to make connections where you feel fit. Fern, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Very lovely to have you. Fern is one of our guest bloggers, and she writes some really fantastic content for our website that we have incredible engagement for. But also I'm always really, really careful, especially with our social media guys, of making sure we're using the right people to discuss the right things. And I think, Fern, you're probably the best adapted. We work with a lot of people in the accessibility industry and media, a lot of subtitlers, a lot of audio describers, but very few are either deaf or blind or both. And I think it's really, really important that we use the right people for the right jobs. So I think some of your insights are invaluable and your writing is incredible. So kudos to that. So I think we'll kick this off with talking a little bit about your career as a broadcaster and talking about what drew you into it. Was it at school? Was it before? Was it after school? Did you, like me, do a very expensive degree in English and political science and then do absolutely nothing with it? Or did you know exactly what you wanted to do at the point of education?
I think I always knew. So when I was young, thinking back on my childhood, my growing up toys, my favorite toys were dolls and a disco duck. I don't know if you know, do you remember that? Disco duck?
What's a disco duck?
Well, it is, and everyone will know, as soon as I say, everyone will know, it's that tape recorder with a microphone. You know the one on Toy Story?
God, yeah, I remember that. Yes,
mine was called the Disco Duck. Now, I'm sure other brands are available, but that was mine.
It was portable, wasn't it? It had like a handle on it, and I think Fisher Price did
and
one.
You could have a microphone. Exactly. And I'm sure lots of people had them when they were young, and I loved telling stories. So obviously with my dolls, both baby and glamorous lady, mostly when I was young, that's what they looked like. I just loved telling stories with them, whatever that was, and usually very ludicrous ones. And then with the Disco Duck, I would just play with my brother, with my friends. That was our idea of fun, which I don't know, maybe that says a lot about me immediately to you. That there was nothing better than pretending like I was interviewing them and asking them all these stupid questions like, so the mystery of the missing socks, where have they gone? All that sort of stuff. And driving my family crazy, to be honest. And then as I was growing up, another big part of, I think, what drew me into broadcasting was that my granny always used to have the radio on. And it was always like talk radio, local stations where, they'd have competitions and they have people call up, they have their regulars like Barry from Basingstoke, he's on again, and you get to know the people. Oh, it's him again. And I loved that. And it was like this beautiful connection where you almost felt like you knew that person, and because it was just audio, it felt very intimate. And I suppose for me now, looking back in hindsight, it almost felt like it was completely equal for me because nobody could see. So we were all on the same level playing field because it was audio only. And so it just felt like this was a person that, the presenter was the person that became almost like your best friend, that if you've had a bad day, you could just turn on the radio and listen to this person and feel like, oh, I can have a laugh, or I can sort of commiserate. And it was lovely. And I just wanted to do that. From that moment, that just lit me up, and it set off a spark in me. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And so from there, I went on and I did hospital radio. Then I did a very expensive degree in broadcast radio. So I always knew. I did actually do a degree in the subject. And I started in Wales, in Cardiff, and then much to my parents' dismay, I went and did the rest of my degree in Western Carolina University in America, because clearly Wales wasn't far enough. And it was amazing. And so I've just always, since then, I've just always been interested in broadcasting and connecting with people and telling stories. And so I guess through there, I've got into various broadcasting roles, but also audio description, which I suppose in essence is all kind of the same thing, right? They're very similar.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, growing up when I was very small, we were a no TV household. And I used to get ready for school with my mother blasting out Radio 4. And the Archers theme tune is something I distinctly remember dancing to around the fire, because of the very well-known music that goes with it. Which I look back on now, we were very much a radio family. And, I grew up, I used to cry about it as a teenager up until I went to boarding school, because then I was allowed to take my own music and I didn't have to listen to Radio 4 in the car anymore or at school. But I used to cry about it. And then as I got older, like even now, I was always a big, I didn't move over. I was a big fan of Ken Bruce. And, then I moved into Jeremy Vine, and I was like, it's Popmaster. And I was dreadful at it because I was too young to guess the questions correctly. I've always been a big fan of radio, and maybe it probably was growing up without a TV. So even though fully sighted, we just weren't a TV household. Apart from on the occasion.
You needed your disco duck, Sophie.
I should have had. I remember seeing them.
You missed out.
With like a microphone on a wire, like attached to them. But I was holding up for a Mr. Frosty as a child, and I eventually got a Mr. Frosty, and it was rubbish. It like my grandma would put ice cubes in it, and the stupid handle wouldn't turn. You definitely, as a 7-year-old child, were not strong enough to turn that handle. And the slushies were nothing like they looked like on the TV, and I was a bit devastated. So I should have probably, to be fair.
What a letdown.
It was a huge letdown, but that was the late 80s, early 90s for you, really. We look back at it with very fondly, but I think the reality of it was... Well, it was the boom of plastic toys, wasn't it? So I don't think
Mr. Frosty sold us short. Yeah,
I had that was my traumatic childhood. Have you found working in the broadcasting realm different with hindered sight?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there has been differences, definitely. I think that I was always brought up to believe you're the same as everyone else, you can do everything the same as everyone else. And I think in some ways that was helpful, because it made me ambitious and it made me feel like I shouldn't kind of limit myself. And in other ways, that can kind of make you feel like, well, I can't do this, I just can't do this full stop, because you don't even consider like maybe there's a different way of doing it, because I've been told I can do it like everyone else can do it. So, it's sort of a double-edged sword a little bit. So there's some things that are good, some things that are bad. And I suppose that I've had to find ways of adapting to being in broadcast without vision. And I think in some ways you just do it very naturally. I think, obviously, these days with technology, with voice technology, that's been a huge help to me. And that's something that I didn't always have, growing up. Growing up, I had a little bit more vision than I do now. And also, it's become more widely available to have this technology that can help you. And so I think now that I rely a lot on listening instead of being able to see, because my vision has deteriorated significantly. So in terms of audio description, I fully now rely on listening. And that's how I do it, as I'm following a script by listening to it and then repeating it as I'm going, which takes some practice in itself. But in terms of broadcasting and interviewing people, I think my memory is a big, my memory has served me well. I think I just try and remember everything. Instead of trying to follow a script, I'll just go through and through and through it and try and kind of memorize everything. And the same when I'm speaking or training or anything like that, I won't be able to have notes. I always envy people who can just glance surreptitiously down at their notes. I'm like,
yeah,
I wish I could do that, but I can't. So it's made me, trained me to have a good memory. But I think also the other thing that I learned doing broadcasting is sometimes it's good to just speak from the heart and just have genuine curiosity. So while it's nice to have questions that, you feel like you should ask this and this would be good and this might bring something out that's specific, sometimes it's nice to just think, what do I want to know? Because a lot of times what you want to know is what the people listening want to know, so you're actually speaking for your audience. And sometimes those are the things that build the best connection or get the best answer that is actually the most interesting. And so that takes bravery, and it takes kind of a bit of vulnerability to be like, oh God, I'm just going on my intuition here and I could be completely wrong. But actually doing that sometimes can be the best thing. And so also, I think being able to notice the things that are missing is kind of plays into that as well. That I, as somebody who can't see, often encounters stories that aren't complete, because there's visual parts that I don't know. And so I've kind of become in tune with what's not being said here and what do we need to know that we don't know at the moment. And so I think that's helped. And I just think in general, if you have a disability or if you have anything where you kind of have to find different ways of doing things, you become very creative because your whole life, or at least a big part of your life, is figuring out, how am I going to do this in a way that works for me? And so it just makes you, by nature, look at everything in a way where you go, okay, I need to figure out something here that's going to work. And 9 times out of 10, I have to say, there is something. It might be crazy to other people and you might look like a fool doing it, but if it does the job, it does the job, just do it anyway.
Absolutely. And I think the ambition and the hunger is completely irrelevant to disabilities, but it's the adaptation of how much does society need to adapt versus you. Because I probably imagine 95% is you adapting to a world that's not prepared for you. Mm-hmm. And 5% of it is companies, venues, just day-to-day walking around is probably they could do better. And I try and discuss this. I have 3 teenage sons, and I've been trying to bring their attention to things like this. When we get to traffic lights, what are the little bobbles for at the, on the pavement at the end of the road? And I'll say, well, they're for blind people to understand where the end of the pavement is, I suppose, before you cross.
Yeah.
And there's a little knobbly bit under the light that moves, spins around. So the kind of things that my children who are fully sighted have never really realized, but trying to get them so used to the fact that there are things built into the world for people that need them, and they need to be aware of that, because I think it's really important.
What's really interesting about that is that for a long time, I didn't know about a lot of these things. So it's not like something that you just know, unless
absolutely.
you're specifically taught it, you don't know. And so I've been going around the world and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I could have used this years ago. Why did nobody tell me about it?
There is not a school for the blind to teach you. Absolutely.
No, I think there just needs to be more education in general about that stuff.
I firmly agree. And are you a Braille reader?
I'm not, but I'm glad you asked because I'm going to learn Braille. I've just signed up to a course because, like I say, I've lost more and more of my vision, and I've recently had a surgery that actually has sort of made my sight go a little bit even lower than it was. So I am starting to transition and find different ways of doing things. So I am now going to start learning Braille, which is exciting.
Fantastic. I often have this. I think I've become really hypercritical of places and companies since working specifically in, we didn't start in accessibility, but we've definitely made the pivot as we've seen kind of the laws changing and the demand. And I've become a nightmare because when I go to events or venues and I'll say, you don't have a Braille sign on the toilets. So how is anyone supposed to know which is male and female? And then I thought, well, not all blind people can read Braille. So should there be some sort of maybe audio that, I don't know, if you don't have a unisex toilet, do you just automatically go to the disabled toilet? But I thought, well, you wouldn't know which door that was either. No. And I've walked into the men's by accident several times. And I've been in countries When I was in China, I spent a good chunk of my gap year in China walking into the wrong toilet because even if they had the male and female stick figures, which they didn't, I couldn't read the signs. So you just open the door and see if it smells good, it's probably the men's,
Right.
and if it smells all right, it's probably the women's. But I do wonder, even in the UK, if you go to a restaurant, there is a small percentage, there's not a lot of Braille. But even if you couldn't read Braille, how do you, like personally, adapt to things like finding the right toilet or finding the right changing rooms or being able to walk? I know that you have a guide dog and she is going to be invaluable to your life. There is not enough support for the guide dog programs. But how does she know if there's male or female? Does she know which way to go? Is she trained that way?
No. So I've never. I mean, I'm sure you probably could train a guide dog to do something like that. I haven't myself, but do you know what? It's so funny that you bring up public toilets because this is a personal bane of my life.
I bet it is. Yeah.
I suppose just finding them is the first hurdle. And to be honest, annoyingly, usually you just have to ask someone, which isn't ideal, because you always almost feel like a child having to say, "Oh, can you take me to the toilet?" It's not
absolutely
the best. But if once you've got, over that hurdle and say you get into the public bathroom, a lot of times, they're not big enough for me to take Nancy into. And so then I feel like, well, nobody knows I can't see now. And I'm very self-conscious of finding everything. So I've got, there's so many things. You wouldn't think about this unless you're in this situation. But when you can't see, there are so many things to find in a toilet. So first you've got to find where the toilet is. You've got to find where the toilet paper is. You've got to find where the flush is. Then you've got to...
Yeah.
The lock, exactly. And the last thing you want to do in a public toilet is be feeling around with your hands, which is, obviously the way that most blind people find where they are and where they're finding different things are. So then I'll come out and I'll have to find the sink and the taps, and you'll know that in every
and it's all automated
toilet,
now, isn't it? Now you just wave your hands around and hope the soap comes out or the dryer starts. Because I did it the other day in the airport. I stuck my hand under thinking it was the dryer and it put more soap on my hands, and I had to restart the process. And I can see. So I can only imagine if you don't have kind of traditional taps to feel, I can only imagine the waving of the arms.
Exactly. And you're standing there.
A bit crazy. Yeah.
Exactly. And you're so aware of that. That is the thing. So many people, I think people think that you don't realize, but let me tell you, you are very self-conscious because you know that you're looking like a complete fool going like, and people are looking at you like, what's wrong with that?
Absolutely.
It's just, and then to come out and that is your experience just going to the loo. Imagine then what that does to your self-esteem and your self-confidence. You just think,
dignity.
I can't even go to the toilet on my own and have a successful, easy experience. But
it could be adapted
these issues
easily. It could be adapted easily. And I feel like being blind is not sort of a 0.5% of the population. Being blind is a regular occurrence. And I use the word blind, hard of sight. I know that it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
But I've seen people with guide. Is it the term guide sticks? I don't know what the term is.
Yeah, or cane.
Canes. Yeah. I do see a lot of people I live in Cardiff. I do see a lot of them. I do see dogs often. I'm very careful. I do approach people, usually at the train station, and say, "Can I help you?" Because I feel like the stupid automated scan the code and get through the gate quick enough before they close on you.
That hasn't.
But I never want to be patronizing, as in, I don't think you can do this by yourself. But I often feel like, well, again, I can see and I often get everything wrong. So I'm just sort of very aware of that. But the toilet is always a big one. And not just the toilet. I think the dignity argument of, for example, if you can't read Braille and you're on medication, does someone have to distribute that to you every day? Do you have to ask how many you're supposed to take? When it comes to buying tampons or pads, do you have to ask for which you need? If you need to read a pregnancy test, do you have to use someone to read that out, or an ovulation test? I kind of feel for women's issues being blind more so than men's, there's a minefield of of monthly occurrences that you have to go through.
Nicely put. Yes,
Yeah.
I think nowadays technology again is helping with that. So there's apps that can help you to
My
read
eyes,
packaging,
excellent. Yeah.
exactly, all of that kind of stuff, and that's good. But what I would say is that again, it's very easy to say, oh well, here's this answer and here's that answer, but I think I'm living, breathing proof as somebody who hasn't actually been able to see very much for a long time and isn't a Braille user, that it's not easy to make that transition. Practically, obviously, you've got to learn all these different apps and whatever it is, but also emotionally to actually say to yourself, I'm at that point now, I need to do this differently. A lot of times we dig our heels in and we resist that because we don't want to admit that actually my sight's tipped over to this point. And it's not, it's not even so much that we think it's something to be ashamed of, but it's just, it's a human thing. We don't like change, do we? We like things the way
of relearning. Yeah. And I think that blind people work so heavily on routine of knowing where things are. I watch a TikTok couple, a gay couple, and one of them is blind. And his partner always sets pranks on him by moving things. So when he comes into his apartment every day, he's like moved the plant or the table where he puts his keys. And I watched it recently. He came in and he put his keys on what he thought was the table, but his partner had moved the table. And the guy genuinely thought he'd let him, he was in the wrong apartment. He thought because he was based on the routine. And he stopped and he said, is this a prank or have I let myself into the neighbor's house? And I thought, like your routine, and then to relearn everything again in a different way. So maybe you suddenly can't be reliant on sounds or apps because now you need Braille or now you need an extra technological aid or physical aid. That suddenly, I think, and
it takes a lot of bravery, I think, to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this transition, and it doesn't mean anything less about me. It doesn't. It's because I think we create all of these stories about what that means about us as a person. Then, if we do that, and that's even harder, because then if you've got this difficult thing that's hard enough anyway, and then you add a load of shame on top of that, it just makes it almost impossible, I'd say.
Absolutely. And I think the shame and I think as with most disabilities, I think it comes back down to dignity. And there's a huge gap there. Even asking for or being denied a wheelchair ramp on a train, there becomes this huge drama about getting a wheelchair ramp just to let somebody off a train. Or I read a post on LinkedIn yesterday of a woman who was refused a ramp because they were too busy and she missed 2 trains. And I just think this can't be the norm. Like and I just think for the 10 minutes out of your day to aid somebody like that, and you think that's too much effort, imagine that person's life, who I don't want to be like, oh, poor Fern, like she can't see. Like it's not in that way at all. It's just kind of like we need to make adaptations so Fern can think on her own 2 feet and get her life. I'm pretty sure you don't want someone holding your hand every time you cross the road. I certainly don't. And it's not any different. However, if there's an essence, me and my partner were in Paris, funnily enough, in October, and we stopped for a coffee in a pavement cafe because people watching in Paris is tremendous fun. And we saw a very, very heavily intoxicated blind man with a cane. Nice. And I don't know where he was going. I assumed he was going home. It was quite late. It was about 10 o'clock and it was dark. And even if he wasn't completely blind, the darkness wouldn't have helped, I imagine. And he was just sort of bouncing off the walls as he went with his cane. And I said to my partner, I don't even know how we could help him because even if he asked us to take us home, we're not from here. And no one was bothered. Everyone was just walking past him as if it was nothing. So I didn't know if he was just did it every day and the locals were used to him. But I didn't want to impede and be like,
it's him again.
Can I help you? I don't know where you draw the line of, is it okay to ask to assist somebody if they might need it? Or is it a little bit impersonal to be like, you clearly need my help? I almost feel like there's a bit of a savior complex. And I don't know, how beneficial is it for you out in public to be approached if you might need help?
Yeah, I think there is no harm in asking. I think if you ask somebody if they need help, and this goes for anyone disabled or not, and their reaction is, how dare you, I think that's an issue with them because, I don't think you or I, if somebody came up to either of us and said, do you need help? Would be offended by that because I know that I could just say, no, thank you, that's fine. But, and a lot of times I do get asked, do you need help with that? And I will say, no, it's, but thank you so much for asking, because I just think I'd rather you ask me and I don't need it than I need it and nobody asks, so I want to encourage that communication. And I think it's a shame when people look and they go, oh, I'd like to ask, but I don't know if I should.
I feel a bit awkward. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's disconnection. And we don't want that. We just want to be able to just voice what we're thinking and to not be offended by it. It's fine. Someone is just, they've got the best of intentions and they're just trying to support you in a nice way. And I think that's how we need to see it. And even if you don't need it, you can just be polite and say no. I mean, often I get asked, do you need help with Nancy's, poo when she goes, and I am always very tempted. I always go, oh no, it's fine. But I'm always very tempted to say, oh well, soon as you ask,
here's the poo bag, crack on.
Yeah, here you go. Yeah, just jump on it.
I might try that. I have a small pug. I might try that in the park next time I don't feel like it. I might just say,
it's okay. It's worth a try.
Let's talk about facial expressions, because this is something that you and I discussed a while back when I had the grand idea of painting portraits, and you were like, yeah, but I can't see. And I was like, that's a really good point.
I'm glad you asked, though. It's a perfect example.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been a fair fight, I don't think. Even as a terrible artist, I just don't think it would have been a fair fight. But let's talk about facial expressions, because I feel like number one, in the media industry, number two, in media in terms of programs, series, content, and face-to-face in real life, we read faces in the West, as you pretty much do anywhere else. You know when someone's bored of you, when someone is getting the joke, when someone's being sarcastic, or they suggestively raise an eyebrow or wink or knit their eyebrows together, or you hear expressions like tongue-in-cheek. And I often wonder if and I'm not talking necessarily people who have had deteriorated eyesight, because I think you may very well have witnessed them at some point in your life, but people who may have been blind from birth, especially, if you've never seen, for example, I just think if I've never seen anyone in the history of the world and I've been blind since birth, and someone said to me, that was a bit tongue-in-cheek. Like, yes, I can understand the sentiment of the sentence, but and to be completely honest, I've never made a joke and then and I'm putting my tongue in my cheek now, but
no.
I look like I have toothache. I look a bit weird doing it. And I kind of feel like, yes, we say I was a bit tongue in cheek, but never once have I seen someone like this
where did that come from?
I've no idea.
And I need to research this one.
There'll be some history behind it where maybe once upon a time you couldn't make jokes, but you could make a facial signal. I don't know. But I've never seen anyone do it. But we know what it means. We understand the sentiment. And perhaps if you're listening to an audiobook, or if I'm reading a book, and they sort of, knitted their eyebrows together. Now, I'm Botox to the hilt, so I can't knit my eyebrows together if I wanted to. I just kind of look like an angry bird when I try. But I understand it, it means that someone could be focusing or annoyed or concentrating or, thinking hard about something. But I think if you've never seen someone knit their eyebrows, what a weird expression to hear, to witness.
Absolutely. What does that mean? I think even for me, I was visually impaired, but I've never been able to see enough to clearly see faces in terms of the expression on the face. So, it is a weird one. And also, I find a lot in audio description when I'm narrating it where people will say, he lowered his eyebrows, and that can mean a variety of different things. And so sometimes I'm sort of like, does that mean he's angry? Does that mean he's thinking? And so it can be misleading in a way, because although, yes, that is practically what is happening, it's difficult to know the reasoning behind that.
How do you interpret faces that you can't see, I guess is the word? Do you rely on tone of voice or conversation flow, or how does that work?
Well, I think a massive part of it is listening, of course, like you say. I think I've very much tuned in. And I think we do this just naturally, don't we? We adapt if we're in a certain situation, even if it's just temporarily. Say you have something in your eye, or you've got some, conjunctivitis or something. You just naturally go, oh, I can't use that. I'm going to have to use something else. So that's where you start tuning into something else. And I suppose it is, a huge amount is listening. I think another part of it is kind of a vibe or intuition, which I get wrong a lot of the time, I have to say. The amount of times that I've said to someone, oh, it just gave me a really dirty look. And they're like, how do you know? And I think, oh, how do I know?
I don't know,
actually. I definitely didn't see it. But it's so weird because I have a really convinced, solid feeling that is what happened. And a lot of times, I have to say, I've been convinced that somebody doesn't like me, and then they'll just do something really lovely, and I'm okay.
I've read it wrong.
Clearly
And
got
again,
that wrong.
your language, a dirty look. I mean, I couldn't break that down and articulate that because I don't know what that is, other than the fact that I've seen it and I'll know it when I've seen it. But could I describe what it is? If I were to write a script right now, for audio description, and the person on screen is giving someone a dirty look, and I don't even know how I would write that as a script, because dirty look is not in itself a complete facial.
No, it's not like a one part of the face, is it? It's like a whole.
No.
It would, and it could be so many different things that would all sort of come together to be a dirty look. But I suppose with that, I'm not even really, A, I haven't seen it. B, I don't actually really know. I don't know if I've ever seen someone give a dirty look. I just, like you said, I just know what it is through like reading or from context. But I think the other part of it that we've kind of already touched on as well is that sometimes I will get it wrong. And I think it's okay to sometimes read things wrongly, because I think that makes us so much more human. And I think where there is, like you said before, around disability, this idea of, oh God, I'm going to get it wrong. Sometimes actually it's nice when somebody who has a disability gets it wrong, because then it's like, oh, actually, we all do. So it's fine. It's, equaling the playing field. And I think sometimes as well, you just need to ask, and you can just laugh it off if you get it wrong. But also sometimes it is just about that really straight communication of just saying, oh, what's he doing over there? Or what does she look like? Or what was going on there? Sorry, I didn't quite understand what was going on there. Because how rare is it that somebody actually just tells us what they need in a moment in just a very plain way? You don't have to guess. We spend our whole lives second guessing and trying to figure out what people want or need from us, like you just said about asking for help. And it was just sometimes so nice when somebody, it's a relief for somebody to say, actually, can you just tell me what happened? Because then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. I know how to do that. I don't have to kind of like wonder, did she want to know? Is it patronizing to tell her? All of this sort of stuff. We're all doing that in our own heads, whether we're disabled or not. I'm doing that in my own. Should I ask? Maybe the awkward. Let's just do it. Let's just actually talk to each other and communicate. And it completely makes it a lot easier, really, doesn't it?
And I kind of feel, I'm not making light of being blind, but there is a part of me that thinks, and I don't know how this is going to come across, there's so many monstrosities and atrocities and horrific things happening in the world. And there are so many judgmental looks, dirty looks. Again, this probably is more on the side of women, that I kind of feel a little bit like they're not things that I would miss. Some of the things that I do have to witness with my eyes are things that I just wish I didn't have to see, and I'm not making light of being blind. Like, I know it's a very serious subject. But there are things that I wish I didn't have to see. And there are things that are happening on the streets, or I live in a very multicultural area, and there's sometimes like bouts of racism, and they're just things that I don't want to see, because I kind of feel like if you took the sight away and the skin color and the argument, then really it's just people, humans living side by side. And there is none of this judgment, biased behavior or preemptive decisions about groups of people. I kind of feel like that's all removed, because they're all horrible judgmental issues that come about from what we physically see as being different. And I think if you remove that and you can only hear people's stories, it's a much nicer place to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think perhaps that's very generous to blind and low vision people, that we're not, we can't be hateful or judgmental, because I think we can.
Yes,
I think, and also I think sadly, I think that even if everyone was blind, I think we would still make judgments.
Well, we'd find a reason to hate people.
We'd find something, wouldn't we? Because it's just human nature. I think a big part of why we judge others is to try and make ourselves feel a little bit better a lot of the time, because we're insecure about something, or whatever it is. And so I suppose but I mean, in terms of there's some things that you would rather not see, I definitely agree with that. Like sometimes I do think, and friends will sort of jokingly say to me, Fern, you're lucky you can't see this. You don't want to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I do think there's merit in that. And also, I have to say, perhaps one of the best times to not be able to see is when somebody's coming that you don't really want to talk to, and you have the perfect excuse because you just think, well, I can just say, oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
I do that in the supermarket all the time. Like I literally just stop dead and turn around and walk in the opposite direction. But the worst thing is they know I've seen them. Like I don't have that excuse.
They clocked
know.
it. Yeah. Well, there's got to be some silver linings to not being able to see, and that's one of them for me.
And that leads me on to my next question quite nicely, is that do you feel that society makes assumptions about your ability to interpret humor, to interpret serious situations, emotion? And if they do, like, how do you challenge that? Because I'm very conscious that as a society with disabled people, you might run into people who baby you, is that the right word? Who, and I don't want to use the word pity because I just think that's a really crap word to use. But I almost feel as in, there is no difference between you and I. I think we're roughly about the same age. Forgive me if I'm wrong. We work in similar industries. I think we have similar views on things. We both have a degree. We both work every day. We both have a dog, granted for different purposes. My pug is horrific. So we're not different other than the fact that you can't see. But now how society would take both of us, entirely different subjects. And I wondered, like, how do you handle people who, I'm going to use the word baby. I really can't think of another word to use, but baby you, who kind of feel like you can't do it for yourself. And they'll be like, oh, well, Fern, how do you feel? No one's asking me how I feel because I can see. And your emotions are not any less in tune than mine. If anything, they'd be more in tune because you would rely on your different senses. But I kind of feel like you would be more handheld. And I don't know if that's frustrating or if you sort of punch people in the face half the time. Does it take away from your need for this, your independent woman? Because you do have some, some areas of your life you do need some help with. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think there is so much of that goes on, and it is very frustrating, upsetting, and also, I suppose, as much as anything, as much as how you would react to someone else, it's, again, what I said earlier, it's sending a message to you about how you feel about yourself. I think sometimes it can make you doubt yourself and make you think, oh, maybe I do need rescuing, or maybe I can't do this on my own. And that is really hard because I always think, I don't want to have to ask for help with stuff. I don't, I want to be able to do it. And again, it's almost like this idea of if you're blind or low vision, or if you have a disability, you just accept that, like, this is just my lot in life. But that's so far from the truth. It is so hard to accept that you are in a situation where sometimes there are certain limitations or where you do need a little bit more support. And that can be really hard. And I think it can be hard from both sides. And I have a lot of compassion for people who, again, are, because I think they come from a good place. It comes from the best of intentions to want to try and help you. Yeah. But definitely there is a line, and it is a line that I've had to talk to, like, my partner and my parents about support me and be there for me and ask me if there's something that I need, but don't do it for me. Because if you do it for me, you're actually holding me back, because I then won't learn to do it for myself. So if you do it for me, I haven't actually grown or moved forward. I've just been in the position where next time I'm going to have to ask you to do it for me again. And so that's not helping either of us. And that's really hard for people, because I get that, and it's what you said earlier, and you're a lovely, lovely lady. And for you, it's hard to look at somebody and go, this person is struggling. Oh, I really want to help them. And like I say, it doesn't come from a mean place and yes, it can be frustrating, but I think what we have to remind ourselves is it is coming from the best of intentions. And so it does just need that gentle communication to just say, I really appreciate your help, and I can see that it's hard for you to see me struggling, and that's lovely, and that's a really nice thing, because I wouldn't want you to think, oh, she's struggling and I don't care. But at the same time, I need you to let me do this. I need you to give me the choice to be able to see if I can figure it out, or figure it out with me. And I think when you do that, you build this trust and this connection, and it's lovely. And I think for me, one of the things that taught me about misconceptions and sort of changed my view on it a little bit was Nancy, who's my guide dog. Because before I got Nancy, I was very much like, I don't want to be a stereotypical blind person, in the sense that up until that point, I'd had nothing that kind of identified me as blind to people who didn't know me. You know, so if I walked down the street, you wouldn't necessarily know just from looking at me that I couldn't see. Whereas immediately, if I got a guide dog, well, then everyone's going to know. And that freaked me out, and to the point that I almost didn't get a guide dog. And then now that I've got Nancy, I realized that actually that just having a guide dog doesn't make you a stereotype. But what it does do is it gives you an opportunity to challenge stereotypes, because now people see me with a guide dog and they go, oh, she can't see, but I can still be me. I can still be everything that
independent living,
witted, independent, young. You know, I can smash those stereotypes just by living my life. I'm not going up to people every day going, what do you think? Let me correct you. I'm just going about my day, being myself, and people go, oh, I thought blind people were X, Y, Z, but actually look at her. She's not any of those things. And I think that's such a powerful thing, where if you're scared of being a stereotype, step into that and just be you. And that's the best way of breaking down misconceptions, is just being you. And in doing so, people go, oh, I was wrong. Okay.
I absolutely agree with that. I feel like sometimes you've got to face the stereotype head on and not just so much prove people wrong, but show that you can be completely successful within doing so.
Yeah.
Talk us through, Fern, talk us through a day with Nancy. From waking up, let's say until lunchtime you're in the house, and after lunchtime you pop out to somewhere. But talk us through a day in the life of the guide dog, because it's really great. Okay. I know it's incredibly expensive to train guide dogs, but I know what incredible lifelines they are for sight-hindered people. Do talk us through it.
Okay, so 7 o'clock, my alarm goes off. As soon as Nancy sees any kind of movement whatsoever, she is there by my bedside waiting for her breakfast. That is what she wants. No, not there by my bedside to greet me, to say, good morning, mummy, I love you. But actually it's just
feed me. Yeah.
So exactly. And we know the truth. So so I sleepily roll out of bed and, trudge to the kitchen and I measure out her food. So guide dogs are very particular about how much you feed your dog, because obviously you want to keep it in optimal health. And being a Labrador, she loves her food, so she would literally eat the whole bag if I let her. So I measure out her food meticulously. I put it into her bowl, and then she has to sit and wait until I say she can go, because obviously if you just put it down and the dog ran over, there could be all kinds of mishaps and mess all over the floor, basically.
Just to pause you there, Fern, how do you measure her food? Do you have audible scales?
I do have audible scales. I've cracked a code, because I did used to do that every day with the audible scales, and they're very good. But I actually have a cup now that is basically the right size, with the weight. So I don't have to do the scales every morning, which is great. So then she'll wait, and then I'll whistle, and she'll have her food, which I'm always still impressed that she still waits for her food. It's amazing, as much as she loves it. So then obviously I'll take her out and she do some toilets and make sure that's all sorted out. And then quite often she'll just luxuriously lounge in the sunshine if we're not going anywhere for a while. And just be a dog. I think that's what a lot of people think, that guide dogs are, it's cruel because they don't get to be a dog, but
working 24/7.
And that could not. If you saw Nancy, in fact, I had an aftercare visit with guide dogs recently, and the woman who came round said, if people could see Nancy now, they would not have that misconception, because she was just lounging with all her toys surrounding her like some kind of goddess. So fan you with your feather. Exactly. So she has a very good life. And then if we're popping out, obviously I'll put a harness on and her lead, and we'll go out, and she'll just help me with things like obstacles, people, road crossings, steps, all of that kind of stuff. I need to know where I'm going. So it's a misconception that guide dogs kind of are like a GPS and just take you where you're going. You go. I mean, to some degree, they know routes. If you take certain routes all the time, like any animal, they'll get to learn it. and then they'll be like, oh, okay, we're going this way. And she'll kind of take me. Usually she tries to take me to the places she wants to go sometimes.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Like, oh, let's go to the beach. And I'm like, no, it's
Park.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you have to be a bit careful of that. But no, she's great. And I think the best part for me about having Nancy, of course, the practicalities are great, but I think for me, it's the emotional, the confidence to have something that's just there next to you, that's guiding you. And I think it is a beautiful example of what we were just talking about supporting you, but not doing it for you. She's not like dragging me along. I'm there and I'm doing my thing, and she's enabling me to be independent by being there and just walking alongside me. And the other part of that is that I've completely gone 180 on what I felt before I got Nancy, of this fear of, oh, what are people going to think? Now it's such a relief when I walk along and people see her and they go, oh, I better get out of her way because she can't see. It's such, I don't have to, because before I had Nancy, I was constantly thinking, oh, people are going to think I'm just rude, or why isn't she looking where she's going, and all of that kind of stuff.
And
now I have an out for that. Like, it's okay.
Absolutely.
I'm not just a young
lost woman
who doesn't care. Exactly. There's a reason, and it makes sense, and that makes me feel like I don't have to completely shame myself all the time and be like, what's wrong with you? Because I think in a second-hand way, when we think, oh, what is this person thinking of me, we're kind of internalizing that and saying, that's what I think of myself, and I don't have to do that anymore. So that's a relief.
Tell me, Fern, with Nancy, now I've always, and I still will always tell my children this, don't ever approach a guide dog when A, has a harness on, or B, if they're out and about, just avoid them, because I always say they're working. And my youngest, Noah, he was like, well, when are they not working? Well, when they're in the houses. But then he said, well, that's when I can't stroke them. That's right. Because they're not your, yes, they are pets. They're a member of the family, but they have the very strict job, and they are very, very good at not buggering about with people in the street. So I have a pug, and he barks at every cyclist that goes past. He tries to eat sticks off the floor. And I feel like there is such a great code of conduct with guide dogs. Is there ever a time where the public can approach you and say, what a beautiful dog, can I stroke her? Or even at home with Josh, does Nancy know that when she's not got a harness on, she's just a pet and she can lie on the sofa with Josh, or she can annoy him for treats? Is there a time where she knows she's not working?
100%. Oh my goodness, yes. She absolutely does. And in fact, to the point where if maybe if she's not in her harness, but I'll take her out with a lead. If Josh is there, she's like, oh well, Dad's here. That's all right. He'll look after her. I don't have to worry.
I'm free. He knows where the roads are.
I can go and smell the roses or smell some other another dog or something like that. So there certainly are times when you can. And I would say, particularly if I'm just like sitting on a bench in the park, for example, I'm not really doing anything, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not in any danger, come up to me and just say, do you mind if I stroke your guide dog? 9 times out of 10, in fact, probably 10 times out of 10 with me, I'll say, yeah, of course, that's great. And I do get kids come up to me quite often and just say, oh, that's a lovely dog, can I stroke her? And I have no trouble with that. If you're asking me, again, it's giving me that choice. If I am in a rush and I just can't stop and whatever, or I'm crossing a road, I'm like, now is just not the time, I can say no, but just ask. That's the most important thing. And I suppose there is an element, the other thing to say is, if you can tell that this person is obviously in a rush, or like I say, in a position where they're like at the top of a flight of stairs or something like that, where the dog needs to be focused and concentrated, that probably isn't the best time to ask. But if, like I say, they're just having a casual stroll along and they look like they don't really, need to be getting anywhere anytime soon, why not just, come up and ask and just see, and then just accept the answer. If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, fair enough. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nancy would be reactive to that, I'm sure. And I think I've got one final question, just based on having a guide dog, is I do read an awful lot of reports about blind people struggling with taxis. I'm assuming until your eyesight gets to a certain point, you can't drive. And I'm not going to name groups of people because I don't find that helpful. I'm going to just use taxis or Ubers in general. Now, there are laws surrounding this which completely protect people who are sight hindered with guide dogs. They are allowed, I think, pretty much everywhere. I don't know how this works with hospitals because I've never seen a guide dog in a hospital, to be honest. But I don't really go to the hospital very often, so that might be why.
Lucky
But I
you.
have seen guide dogs everywhere. I've seen guide dogs in the library, ironically. I've seen them in supermarkets. I've seen them in the park. I've seen a guide dog in the bank before. I've seen guide dogs pretty much everywhere. But taxis, now I see forever seeing reports about they won't let my dog in a taxi. Now, you are legally allowed to take a guide dog onto public transport. It's completely allowed. Taxis are included in that. What do you do in that situation?
It's a really difficult situation. And I have to say, it isn't just taxis, it's public places quite often as well. And to answer your question about hospitals, by the way, guide dogs are allowed. So if you've got like an appointment in a clinic, they can come into the hospital. They're just not allowed in any kind of like surgical environments for obvious reasons.
Okay. Yeah.
But visits, everywhere else they can come. Yeah, exactly. So theatres, are off limits, as in hospital theatres. But anywhere else, they can come.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in terms of being refused, it is really hard. And as somebody who is a people pleaser and does not like conflict, I really struggle with it. Some people, like as we know, blind and low vision people are just people. So there's a whole range of different kinds of people. Some people love a fight. Some people, they relish it. Yeah. But for me, I can't think of anything worse, to the point where I have genuinely before thought, I just don't want to go there because if they kick up a stink, I don't want to deal with that. And that's such a shame because that makes me not go to your place of, your establishment or your taxi. I think obviously what you can do is challenge it and say, well, it's the law, you have to admit that this is a guide dog. If you have any documentation, you can show them that, but you don't legally have to show them documentation as long as they have a harness on. But it is very difficult because I think even then if they back down and they let you in, you always feel a little bit self-conscious, like, I don't think I'm really welcome here. I don't think they really want me here. They've just kind of been forced to. Sometimes it's a genuine mistake. And again, I err on the side of compassion because sometimes people just haven't been educated. And I get that if, let's say, this is stereotypical, but let's say you've got a Saturday job, you're a young person, and you've been told, do not let any dogs in this place. You're just looking out for yourself, right? You're not trying not to get into trouble. Yeah. And in that case, I might say, oh, can I speak to the manager? And if the manager comes out, they might just say, oh, no, it's fine, and correct that. So I think the most important thing here is education, that people should be educating their staff around guide dogs. This is tale as old as time by this point. We shouldn't still be having these issues. Yeah. But I think the hardest part of it is not so much the will you in the end get to be there or not. It's how it makes you feel about yourself. And again, it's hard enough to admit, like, oh, I need a guide dog now. I have to do it this way. And then to, on top of that, be trying to live your life and going out there and putting yourself out there again and trying to do things with your friends or going on a date or any of these situations. And then this comes up and you feel like, I'm not welcome here and I can't do things like everyone else. And, all of this stuff that people have told me about, oh, you can be independent, you can do this and that. That's not true. Reality, because here I am. Yeah. And it's kind of denying that reality of you. And again, it's how it makes you feel about yourself and your self-esteem. And it's really hard. And I think that, ironically, where before, when I had a little bit more sight, before I got Nancy, I was always pretending that I was fully sighted. Now, sometimes I almost have to prove or try and convince people that I'm blind. And it's gone the opposite way. Yeah. And it's crazy because it's like before when I had a little bit more sight, I was pretending that I had full sight. Now I have a little bit less sight and I am more, closer to being fully blind. I have to convince people that I can't see. I genuinely can't. And to be doubted like that, when you live your life having to do all of these things and make all of these adaptations, you just think, I wish I was lying sometimes. You know, you get to that point where you just think, if only I was, I wouldn't be living this life and going through all of this stuff. If I just wanted to get my dog, it wouldn't be worth it for me, you know?
And so the thing is, it's like I've eaten in many coffee shops or cafes where dogs are welcome. Guide dogs are the best behaved dogs you could have anywhere. They're so well trained. And I kind of feel like surely if there was ever going to be a reason to let a dog into a restaurant or a supermarket or wherever it might be, surely a guide dog is what you want. You want the dogs that are literally trained from being birthed, literally from being born, from being birthed right through to their day-to-day job, and their working dogs. They would be the dogs you want in your establishment, without a doubt in my mind. It would be a guide dog. Because they're not going to run away or knock things over or leave you abandoned. That, you know, or bark unnecessarily. They don't do that. They're really well behaved. And I just kind of feel like surely they would be the least amount of drama to let in.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like I say, it's about education and understanding, because I think if people who worked in these places understood the difference that it makes having a guide dog to somebody who can't see, it's not just about, can my dog come in with me? It's about, can I come in here and can I feel welcome? And can I feel like I can do stuff on my own? Because it almost makes me emotional to talk about it when you realize that I'm in this position and I have a disability, but I can still live my life like everyone else. That means so much. And that's what you're giving to someone. That's the heart of what you're allowing someone when you allow a guide dog into a shop. It's not just about, can my dog come in? It's about, how do I feel about my ability to still be a human and live the life I want to live?
And conduct your life in normal social surroundings. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, it's a no-brainer. Perfect. Well, thank you, Fern. And just for any listeners and / viewers, Fern is voicing the audio description for the new ITV hit Code of Silence. We're not going to say any more on that, but if you do want to listen to Fern in action, you can turn the audio description on ITV, 6-part series. And VoiceBox are really, really proud to be contributing, supporting, and editing some of the silent ads that ran on there as well. So whilst we both worked on the same project, we didn't know that at the time, up until yesterday, actually. So yeah, if you do want to hear Fern in action, please go to the ITV, either replay it was on last night or tune in and have a listen to her. Beautiful voice and well executed. Really great. Fern, always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. We love all the work that you do for us. And Fern does write our guest blogs, and she's fantastic. So please head over to our website and check out the blogs. Fern, I think, writes every 1 or 2 months. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Lots of different insights from working to day-to-day life to how things are differently endured in society. Please check it out. Really great writing. We're very happy with you. In fact, I think you're possibly like the longest guest blogger we've kept, because you've like, your writing is so good. So yeah, fantastic. We do appreciate you. And if there's anything we can do, let us know. But yeah, absolutely wonderful talking to you, and look forward to it again.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for having me on, Sophie. And I just want to take this opportunity to say that what you do is amazing, and genuinely, audio description and all of the access services that you provide, they do exactly what I've just said about guide dogs. They make you feel like you belong, like you matter, that you're not alone. And that makes all the difference to someone like me. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. That's really kind. Thanks, Fern. We'll speak soon.